Good evening. While the world watched Donald Trump execute the most audacious military operation in Latin America since the invasion of Panama, one leader's response stood out for all the wrong reasons: Keir Starmer. The British Prime Minister's handling of the Venezuelan crisis has exposed not just the weakness of the so-called special relationship, but a profound failure of moral leadership that deserves careful examination. Let's start with what actually happened. On Saturday morning, as news broke that American special forces had seized President Maduro from Caracas, world leaders scrambled to respond. Some condemned the operation outright, others expressed deep concern. France said the action violated fundamental principles of international law. Germany called it a coup. Brazil's Lula declared it crossed an unacceptable line. Even Canada, America's closest neighbor, explicitly stated the intervention was not in accordance with international law. And what did Britain's Prime Minister say? That he needed to wait for Trump's press conference to find out what happened. Let that sink in. The leader of what Britain claims is America's closest ally admitted on national television that he was waiting, along with everyone else, to watch Trump's press conference to learn the facts. Not a phone call, not a briefing from the White House, not even a heads-up from intelligence sharing. Just waiting for the public announcement like any citizen scrolling through social media. Starmer stated he wanted to speak to President Trump and allies, saying he could be absolutely clear the UK was not involved and that he believed countries should uphold international law, but then immediately hedged, suggesting they should wait to establish the facts first. It was diplomatic gymnastics designed to say everything and nothing simultaneously. This represents a spectacular failure on multiple levels. First, there's the intelligence failure. If Britain truly has a special relationship with the United States, if the Five Eyes intelligence partnership means anything, then the British government should have known this operation was coming. The fact that Starmer appeared genuinely blindsided suggests either the Americans deliberately kept Britain in the dark, or British intelligence is nowhere near as connected as we've been led to believe. Neither option is flattering. Second, and far more damaging, is the moral failure. When asked directly whether the operation violated international law, the very framework Britain claims to champion, Starmer refused to answer. He's a former human rights lawyer, a man who built his career on the rule of law, and when confronted with the clearest violation of international norms in decades, he couldn't bring himself to state the obvious. Compare this to France. French Foreign Minister Jean-Noël Barrot didn't equivocate. He stated clearly that the military operation violated the principle of not resorting to force that underpins international law. Germany's opposition wasn't much kinder, with prominent politicians openly calling it a coup and saying Trump was destroying what remained of trust in America. These are countries without any pretense of a special relationship, and yet they found their voice immediately. Starmer's position evolved throughout the day in a way that made things worse, not better. By Saturday afternoon, he had graduated from "we need to establish the facts" to posting that Britain regarded Maduro as an illegitimate president and shed no tears about the end of his regime, while still refusing to address the legality question directly. It was the worst of both worlds: tacit approval of the action without the courage to defend it explicitly. The political calculation is transparent. Starmer is terrified of upsetting Trump. Britain is desperate for a trade deal post-Brexit. The government has spent months attempting to build bridges with the Trump administration, with Starmer even traveling to meet Trump before he took office. The last thing Number 10 wants is to antagonize the American president over what they probably view as a distant Latin American issue that doesn't directly affect British interests. But this calculation exposes a profound misunderstanding of leadership. Yes, Maduro ran a corrupt authoritarian regime. Yes, the 2024 election was rigged. Yes, Venezuela has been economically devastated under his rule. None of these facts, not one, justifies a military invasion, the seizure of a head of state, and Trump's extraordinary claim that America would simply run another country. If international law only applies when it's convenient, if sovereignty only matters for countries we like, then the entire 1945 rules-based order is a fiction. And if Britain won't defend that order when it's violated so flagrantly, then what exactly does Britain stand for? Within Starmer's own party, backbenchers were far more willing to speak plainly. Labour MP Richard Bergen put it bluntly, stating you cannot pick and choose when you believe in international law, calling on Starmer to stand up to Trump's gangster politics. Diane Abbott noted this was the latest in a long list of American military interventions, adding that if you cannot say such actions are illegal, then your talk of human rights and democracy is meaningless. Their right and their clarity make Starmer's equivocation look even worse. The practical implications are deeply concerning. If America can seize a head of state with impunity, and Britain's response is to mumble about establishing facts while shedding no tears, what message does this send? That military might makes right? That international law is optional for powerful nations? That Britain will always defer to Washington regardless of the circumstances? Consider the precedent. Trump has openly threatened intervention in other countries, Iran, Syria, even suggesting he might take Greenland by force. If Britain won't criticize the Venezuelan operation, on what basis would it object to future American military adventures? The answer, apparently, is that it wouldn't. The contrast with Scotland's response is instructive. First Minister John Swinney managed to say what Starmer couldn't, acknowledging that while Maduro's regime was illegitimate and authoritarian, it remained essential that all nations act within the international rules-based system. It's not complicated. You can condemn Maduro's dictatorship while also condemning violations of international law. Children understand this principle. Why couldn't the Prime Minister? What makes Starmer's position particularly galling is the hypocrisy. When Russia invaded Ukraine, Britain was among the loudest voices condemning violations of sovereignty and international law. Starmer himself has repeatedly invoked the importance of the rules-based order in defending Ukraine. But apparently, that order only matters when it's being violated by countries Britain already opposes. This isn't just about Venezuela. It's about whether Britain has any independent foreign policy at all, or whether we've simply become a vassal state that rubber stamps whatever Washington decides to do. The special relationship has always required Britain to occasionally swallow its pride and support questionable American actions. But there used to be limits. There used to be moments when British leaders would quietly but firmly make clear that certain lines shouldn't be crossed. Under Starmer, even that minimal standard seems beyond reach. The Prime Minister appears so desperate to maintain good relations with Trump that he's willing to abandon core principles, contradict Britain's stated commitments to international law, and humiliate himself on the world stage by admitting he had no idea what his closest ally was planning. The Venezuelan operation will be studied for years as a watershed moment in American foreign policy, but it should also be studied as a moment that exposed the emptiness of British claims to moral leadership. When the moment came to stand up for the principles Britain claims to cherish, Keir Starmer looked at his feet and mumbled about establishing facts. Leadership requires courage. It requires the willingness to say difficult truths even when they're inconvenient. It requires defending principles even when there's a political cost. On all these measures, Starmer's response to Venezuela represents a comprehensive failure. He couldn't even match the clarity of Germany, France, or even Scotland, let alone set any kind of moral standard.
The tragedy is that Britain once had the credibility and standing to influence American behavior. We might not have prevented the Venezuelan operation, but a clear, immediate statement that this violated international law might have made future operations harder to justify. Instead, Starmer's equivocation sent the opposite message, that Britain will find a way to rationalize whatever America does, that the special relationship means subordination, and that principles are negotiable when Trump is involved. For a former human rights lawyer who built his career on the rule of law, it's a betrayal that will define his premiership. And for Britain, it's another step in the long decline from a country that helped build the international order to one that can't even bring itself to defend it. That's the analysis. The situation continues to develop, but the damage to British credibility has already been done.